I'm delighted to be here, and I want to take a moment because I grew up as a history major and never knew these stories. There was a void, and these stories matter because how we know who we are in the world is by how we know what we've come from, right?
Right.
Yes, and so what happens when we don't know that in the most simple terms is what happens is one more generation like this wonderful girl or my 8-year-old granddaughter grows up vulnerable to being duped into thinking they have to prove themselves again. And we don't want that. Okay. So I'm the author of Rosie the Riveter, Where the Action Is in World War II. And one of the fun things I got to do in writing this book was actually interview Mary Doyle Keefe, who was the author. And it was fun because she asked me to autograph a book for her, and I said, well, I'll only autograph a book for you if you autograph one for me. So I have an autograph of my own book by the cover, the cover thing. And what was fun about this is because Mary Doyle told me that first Norman Rockwell had given her saddle shoes. You didn't go to work in saddle shoes, did you? No. Did anybody go to work? No. So he was.
We had steel toe shoes.
Exactly. But so he originally had, and even these are loafers. I thought, no. But that's okay. He was an artist. Okay. And then the other thing about this, and you were a riveter. Were you a riveter?
Oh yes.
Okay. Oh, you're all riveters. All right. So all of you would have, if Norman Rockwell had consulted with you, he would not have made the mistake on the cover, which he acknowledged later, is he put both goggles and an isinglass shield. And did any of you ever wear two protective? No. So you'll see if you look closely that there's the isinglass shield that's, on their head, and then
we didn't even know that existed.
And the thing is that
you know who wore that extra helmet type were the
welders.
Welders. It wasn't plastic.
Right, it wasn't plastic. I
metal.
know. There were a number of mistakes, but it's okay because Mary Doyle.
Well, he's an artist, so we're giving the.
Well, he also did an interview shortly after this cover came out, admitting to his errors. And he also said that he really should not only apologize for those errors, but also apologize to his model, who really is a very beautiful woman and doesn't have those kinds of muscles. Although Mary told me she wouldn't have minded having those kinds of muscles. So that was the fun thing about writing. And I have to tell you, just to tell you a thing is the person who taught me how you all riveted, because I need to write about this, I needed to know, was a riveter named Jan Berenstain. Although that wasn't her name at the time. Her name was Janice Grant. You got it. So Janice Grant was a riveter. Okay. So shout out. Who did she grow up to be?
Berenstain Bears.
Exactly. And yeah, very good. You're
I've read it to my children.
You read it right. Okay, everybody's read the Berenstain Bear books? Okay. So Janice Grant totally attributed her success as an artist and producing those that endless series of Berenstain Bear books to her experience, the discipline.
Is that from the mic?
I don't know. So that's it. And then my other book is another little-known story, which fascinated me, is the story of women war correspondents in World War II. And the women I particularly focused on were the women, and I know this group will really appreciate this group of women. They defied the military regulations. They're the ones who managed to get accredited, but of course were then told, you can't cover combat, it's too dangerous for a woman. Like, the pilots, it was too dangerous for them to fly in combat, but they could have novice gun shooting at them. Or they could train pilots, but, right, we know the schema here, right? And so, this was a group of women, and I focused on 18 who actually covered the action. Who, like Margaret Bourke White, Martha Gellhorn, Lee Miller, actually Marguerite Higgins, who died, get contracted a tropical disease when she was covering Vietnam and is buried actually in Arlington, actually got to Dachau and then liberated the southern part of the camp before the American troops got there, because she was in a Jeep with an Army sergeant, and they drove in and the German guards started throwing their pistols into the back of the Jeep and surrendered to her, and so they drove out. I write about that in my book. And Lee Miller was a photographer for Vogue, and it was sort of crazy. Sometimes writing these books are sort of crazy making, because I go into the archives and I look at the material and I say, how could this be? Like the spring issue of Vogue magazine of 1945. Okay, are you with me? Okay, so come with me into an archive. Okay, and the librarian hands you that actual magazine. Okay, is everybody with me? Okay, now we've just gone through this war, right? Horrors, we know what's going on. The whole issue is full of fashion, the latest fashion from Paris. In the middle, however, is Lee Miller's article saying, believe it, you must, with her pictures from Buchenwald. It's a really, really powerful, again, I write about that in my book. But for me, it was so, because I was born actually on September 2nd, 1944. So that's the first anniversary of the Japanese surrender on the battleship Missouri. And it was just sort of an amazing thing for me to understand what it is about how wars keep happening, how we don't really learn stuff, you know, embedded in all the latest fashions from Paris are these horrific pictures of this incredible, you know, this unbelievable atrocity. So there's a lot to learn, which is again why we need to tell these stories. So by the time World War II ended, America's wartime production record included almost 300,000 airplanes, over 100,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, 88,000 warships, 370,000 artillery pieces, 47 million tons of artillery ammunition, and 44 billion rounds of small arms ammunition. Time magazine called America's war production a miracle. This miracle would not have happened without you all, without all the women who went to work in these factories, took dangerous jobs. There was a report published by the Labor Department, which again I report in my book, in the New York Times, where there were greater numbers of industrial accidents and fatalities on the home front than on the battlefield. It's astonishing, isn't it? Astonishing. And if you look on the back of the handout, you'll see two of the women I talk about, because this miracle would not have happened without women war workers, including Norma Cutting, who's right there in the middle. See her? The crane operator, who operated 60 feet above a cement floor at a steel factory. And next to her, does anybody know who's to the left? Who's to the left of Norma Cutting? No, sorry, to the right. Who's to the right of Norma Cutting?
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. What was her name at the time? Yes, and she worked she's working in a dope room at a factory called Radioplane in California, Radioplane, where liquid plastic and dope was sprayed. And she was such a proficient worker that she won several Navy E's for excellence for her service, and was hard at work when a military photographer came through. And initially, she refused to have her picture taken because she didn't want to slow down her production. But her boss, a guy on the line, of course told her she had to. And of course, that's one of those photographs, and we all know what the result of that was. And then in addition, millions more women performed what was called essential civilian jobs that kept the home front running smoothly. You can see them there. Police officers, loggers, taxi drivers, baseball players, pharmacists, chemists. The woman in the white coat on the sort of the left-hand side of the page, her name was Louise Ackerman, and she was a young chemist in Pittsburgh. And she invented a glue that was strong enough, literally, to hold up a locomotive. Now, how was her exploits reported in the press? Was it that she was a brilliant scientist? Was the chemical da-da-da-da, was that how it was reported in the press? No, it was about how she had done in the laboratory what any woman can do in her kitchen. It was all the culinary connection. So as I was reading this, doing my research, because of course I grew up when there was this cultural amnesia, and I talked to Edith, and I loved Edith's comment when she was talking about this event, and you said, you know, it's about time, and we all agree with that. And if you can turn over on the back, you can see the latest addition to honoring you all. The right-hand photograph at the top is, of course, was dedicated in 2000. Which is the Rosie the Riveter Memorial, the National Park in Richmond, California. And that's an artist's depiction of a Liberty ship, and the length from the lower part where there's that structure to the end is the length of a Liberty Street, and it's full of archival quotes and photographs. There's also General Boyd's made just a huge contribution of the Women in Memorial in Arlington that was dedicated in 2006? 1997. Oh, wow, sorry. I got my dates mixed up. And the latest, which was just dedicated to the left, 15 minutes from my house in New Jersey, is a Rosie the Riveter statue that was dedicated on June 19th of this year on the grounds of a former Curtiss Wright airplane factory. And there it is, a 6-foot bronze statue that's part of an industrial park. So yes, it's been long overdue, but here we are with this marvelous celebration put together by the wonderful co-chairs of this event, and in this marvelous space of the Women's Heritage Society. You all should be so proud that Maryland has this, and the people who have fought to get this. So when the war ended, of course, we all know what happened. These extraordinary job opportunities for women abruptly disappeared. According to William McCahey, who supervised women war workers at a factory in Camden, New Jersey, quote, "I'll never forget the day after the war ended. We met the girls at the door and we handed them a slip to go over to personnel and get their severance pay. We didn't even allow them in the building, all these women with whom I had become so close, who had worked 7 days a week for years and had been commended so many times by the Navy for the work they were doing." Although America no longer needed women war workers, women in civilian jobs, women in civil defense, women in the Red Cross during the large numbers, women as plane spotters, women recycling, women gathering. There was a group in New York that in 1 week collected a mile-long length of nylon stockings to be used during the war. I mean, women's contributions go all the way through every aspect of life in an individual's life and in the country's life during this time. And as I immerse myself in this story, bouncing between, why didn't I know any of this? I majored in history. What happened to this story? I was just enthralled with the story of women stepping up, you know, and African American women, despite enormous prejudice. African American women were typically given jobs in like explosive factories, you know, way out in the boondocks of like Georgia, because they were told that African Americans' fingertips, specifically women, African Americans' fingertips were more sensitive to explosives. Well, we all know what that meant. It meant if they're expendable, they can get blown up because these factories would blow up. There were racial incidents in Baltimore, in Detroit, but African American women continued, you know, to come back. There's records of Native American women in Seattle who worked. Again, there's a picture in my book. So, you know, there are some women with disabilities. Roosevelt kept an eye on that. I've written a biography of Frances Perkins during this time. Frances Perkins, who was Secretary of Labor. People with disabilities, again, there's a picture in my book. Actually, blind women, in fact, regardless of race, do have more sensitive fingertips. So they were given very sensitive jobs that required feel. So, you know, there's just so many different aspects to talk about this whole story. But when the war ends, we're told, or we were told, or I was told, or if anybody knows anything about this period, and they were kind of how it's explained about what happened to these jobs for women, what did we get told? Because they wanted, yeah, right, exactly. Camille, yes. They went home because they wanted to, because they were tired, because it really wasn't women's work. Well, some women were ready to quit. Lorraine Bloom, a riveter in a Boeing plant, was quoted in a company newsletter as saying, "As soon as it's curtains for the Access, it's going to be lace curtains for me. I want to establish my own home and stay put." But many women did mind losing their jobs. In Highland Park, Michigan, 200 women who had been laid off at the Ford plant conducted a protest. Marching in front of the plant, women carried signs that read, "Stop discrimination because of sex. How come no work for women?" When Attilia Juliet Goddess, who had worked at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation for the duration of the war, was laid off, she wrote to President Roosevelt, quote, "I happen to be a widow with a mother and a son to support. I would like to know why, after serving a company in good faith for almost 3.5 years, it's now impossible to obtain employment with them. I'm a lathe hand and was classified as a skilled laborer, but simply because I happen to be a woman, I'm not wanted." As women lived their lives after World War II, many women war workers did not talk about their experience. For some women, it was too painful to remember how quickly their careers as welders, riveters, and crane operators had ended. Other women were working hard to survive, did not have time to reminisce. Many women felt that people were not interested in their stories, especially in the 1950s when there was an escalating trend towards blaming working women for problems ranging from, let me see, autism, juvenile delinquency, divorce. Remember, women all got the blame. There was even a term, a schizophrenic mother. You all remember that blame that was heaped on. But women war workers, I discovered in my research, never forgot the experience they had for the duration of World War II. They never forgot the thrill of getting a chance, tell me if I'm wrong, of doing a job, of getting a job and doing it. They never forgot the satisfaction of earning good wages. With me?
Although it's smaller
Right, even though it was smaller, it was a little more than
what we had.
exactly. They never forgot the excitement of being independent, but they never forgot that once a time in their lifetime, there was a time in America where women were told they can do anything, and they did it.